Picture this. It is 5 in the morning in a small village tucked between the rolling hills of central Anatolia. The air is thin and cold, carrying the smell of dry earth and wood smoke from the house behind you. There is no irrigation system, no raised beds, no expensive soil amendments sitting in branded bags by the door. There is just a man, older than most trees in this valley, standing at the edge of a field that his grandfather broke with his bare hands, and his grandfather before that. He is holding nothing but a short-handled hoe, and before the sun has fully cleared the ridgeline, he has already begun. He does not check a gardening app. He does not watch tutorials. He reads the sky the way you read a familiar face, knowing what it means before it speaks. He feels the soil between his fingers and knows, without a thermometer, whether it is ready. He plants by memory, by season, by the knowledge carried in his bloodline across hundreds of years of Anatolian growing seasons.
And every single autumn, that same unassuming patch of rocky, sun-baked ground feeds his family through winter. Now ask yourself this: when did gardening become something that required a credit card? Because somewhere along the way, growing food turned into an industry. Seed catalogs got thicker, garden centers got more expensive, YouTube thumbnails started promising miracles from $60 soil mixes and imported raised bed kits. And quietly, in the background, the Anatolian farmer kept doing what he has always done, planting with what he had, harvesting more than he needed, wasting almost nothing. This video is not about trends. It is not about aesthetics or perfectly curated garden layouts designed to perform well on social media. This is about something much older and much more powerful than that. This is about how to actually grow food, real food, in one of the most geographically demanding, climatically unpredictable, and historically rich farming landscapes on Earth. This is about learning to garden the way it was done long before gardening became a hobby. Anatolia is not an easy place to farm. The Central Plateau bakes in dry summers and freezes in brutal winters. The Taurus Mountains do not forgive careless planting. The Black Sea foothills are generous with rain, but stubborn with soil. And yet this land has fed civilizations. Hittites grew grain here. Ottoman households survived on gardens smaller than your living room. Village women in Cappadocia have been harvesting peppers, onions, and lentils from the same terraced plots for generations, using tools so simple they would make most modern gardeners laugh. That is the knowledge we are unpacking today. Not the gardening of catalogs and kits, the gardening of necessity, wisdom, and deep, unbroken connection to the soil beneath your feet. If you have land in Anatolia, or you want to understand what real growing looks like from the ground up, stay right here. Because what these farmers know is worth more than any seed packet ever sold. Before we go any further, if nobody has ever shown you that real food comes from real knowledge and real soil, then this channel was built for you. Here at the Anatolian Peasant Farmers, we go deep into the wisdom, the methods, and the unbroken farming traditions that have fed families across this ancient land for thousands of years. If that speaks to something in you, hit subscribe right now. Not at the end of the video, right now. Because what we are about to walk through together is only the beginning of everything this channel has to offer. Now, let us go into the land. It starts before the planting, before the seeds, before the tools come out of the shed, and before you draw a single line in the dirt. It starts with something the old Anatolian farmer has always done first, something so simple that modern gardening culture has almost completely forgotten it. He walks his land. Not once, not with a checklist in hand. He walks it in the morning, when the dew is still sitting on the surface and the soil tells a different story than it will at midday. He walks it after rain, watching where the water runs, where it pools, where it disappears fast, and where it lingers. He walks it in the dry heat of a July afternoon, noting which corners hold moisture and which patches have already cracked open like the palm of an old working hand. He does this across days, sometimes weeks, before a single seed touches the ground. This is not laziness. This is the foundation of everything. Because in Anatolia, land is not uniform.
Within a single plot the size of a modest backyard, you can have three completely different growing conditions. The southern-facing slope near the stone wall will be warm and dry, perfect for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. The low corner where water collects after rain will be cooler and heavier, better suited for leafy greens and root vegetables. The patch closest to the old mulberry tree will have rich, composted soil from decades of fallen leaves, deep and forgiving, ideal for anything you want to establish quickly. The Anatolian peasant farmer does not fight these differences. He maps them in his head and works with them. That is the first lesson, and it is the most important one in this entire video. Your land is not one thing, it is many things. And your job before you plant anything is to understand what those things are. Here is how you do it practically. Spend at least 3 days observing your plot at different times of day. Mark in your mind or on paper where the sun hits first in the morning and where it reaches last in the afternoon. South and southwest facing areas in Anatolia receive the longest and most intense sunlight, which is gold for warm season crops. Notice where the wind comes from. In central Anatolia especially, the north and northeast winds in early spring can be brutal on young seedlings, so your first beds should be sheltered from that direction if at all possible. Next, pick up your soil. Squeeze it in your fist. If it crumbles apart like dry bread, your ground is sandy and fast draining, common on the Anatolian plateau. If it holds its shape like clay and feels almost sticky between your fingers, you have heavy soil that will need breaking and feeding before it becomes productive. If it holds shape briefly, then falls apart gently, you are holding something close to what every farmer in this land has prayed for across centuries. Loam. Dark, workable, alive. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known that no gardening book will tell you. Soil is not a problem to be fixed with products. It is a conversation to be had with patience. The farmer who walks his land first, who reads it before he reshapes it, will always outgrow the one who arrives with expensive amendments and zero observation. Every great Anatolian garden began not with planting, but with listening. And once you know your land, truly know it, everything that follows becomes simpler than you ever expected. There is a moment every Anatolian farmer knows intimately. It happens in late February or early March, when the last hard frost has loosened its grip on the plateau, and the soil, frozen solid since November, begins to soften from the top down. The old farmers call this the land waking up. And the way you treat it in those first tender weeks determines everything that grows from it for the rest of the year. Most people assume that breaking ground means simply digging. Turn it over, loosen it up, done. But watch an experienced Anatolian farmer work his soil in early spring, and you will see something entirely different. You will see a man in conversation with the earth beneath him, reading every shovelful, adjusting every stroke, never forcing what the ground is not yet ready to give. This is where your garden either begins well or struggles for the entire season. The first thing the Anatolian farmer checks before breaking ground is timing. Not the calendar date, but the soil itself. Grab a handful from about 4 inches below the surface. Squeeze it firmly in your fist, then open your hand and press your thumb into the clump. If it shatters and crumbles, the soil is ready to work. If it smears and sticks together like wet clay, it is still too wet, and working it now will destroy its structure, compacting it into hard, airless blocks that roots will struggle to penetrate all season long. Patience here is not hesitation. It is wisdom. Once the timing is right, the Anatolian method of breaking ground begins not with deep, aggressive digging, but with what village farmers across the Central Plateau have practiced for generations. A single deep cut, 30 to 40 centimeters down, using whatever tool is available. In the old days, it was a wooden plow pulled by an ox across fields baked harder than brick. Today, it might be a hand fork or a basic spade. The tool matters far less than the intention behind it.
Turn each section of soil and leave it. Do not pulverize it immediately. Let the broken clods sit exposed to sun and air for 2 to 3 days. This does something that no fertilizer bag can replicate. It allows frost pockets trapped deep in the soil to finish their work, breaking up compaction naturally. It exposes dormant weed seeds to light, triggering them to germinate so you can remove them before your crops ever go in. And it invites the birds. In every Anatolian village you will see this: sparrows and starlings working a freshly turned field, pulling out grubs and larvae that would otherwise spend the summer eating your roots from below. After those initial days, go back through with a hoe or hand fork and break the larger clods down. Work across the plot rather than up and down the same lines. The Anatolian farmer never compacts his soil by walking the same path repeatedly. He works from the edges inward, standing on unworked ground as long as possible, protecting the structure he is trying to build. Now comes the moment that separates the Anatolian approach from everything else. Instead of reaching for a bag of purchased fertilizer, the village farmer reaches for what he has already been saving all winter. Kitchen scraps composted in a corner of the yard, ash from the wood stove, rich in potassium, worked lightly into the top layer. Animal manure, aged and dry, spread thin across the broken surface and turned in gently. These 3 ingredients, compost, ash, and aged manure, have fed Anatolian soil for 10,000 years without a single product label or price tag attached. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known: healthy ground does not need to be conquered. It needs to be restored. Every time you break Anatolian soil the right way, feeding it back what the previous season took out, you are not just preparing a garden bed. You are continuing a conversation between a family and their land that has been going on longer than any of us can fully imagine. And that conversation, tended with patience and respect, never stops producing. There is an old saying passed between farmers on the central Anatolian plateau that translates roughly like this: "The man who wastes water in July will beg the ground for food in September." It sounds harsh until you have stood in the middle of an Anatolian summer and felt what that sun actually does to exposed soil. Within hours of watering, the surface bakes into a pale crust. Within days without rain, even established plants begin pulling inward, conserving everything they have just to survive. Water in Anatolia is not a convenience, it is a currency. And the farmers who have worked this land across centuries learn to spend it with the precision of someone who knows exactly how much they have and exactly how much they need. This chapter is about that precision. Because no matter how well you read your land, and no matter how perfectly you broke your ground, if you water the wrong way in Anatolia, your garden will fight you all season long. The first principle the Anatolian farmer operates by is deceptively simple. Water the soil, not the plant. This is not a metaphor. It is a literal instruction that changes everything about how your garden survives the summer. When you water from above, drenching leaves and stems in the midday heat, 2 things happen that work directly against you. First, the water evaporates from the surface before it ever reaches the root zone where it is actually needed. Second, wet foliage in intense Anatolian heat becomes a breeding ground for fungal disease, the kind that can move through an entire bed of tomatoes or cucumbers in less than a week. The old village farmers solved this problem long before drip irrigation existed as a concept. They watered at the base of each plant, using a simple technique still practiced in villages across Konya, Ankara, and Kayseri today. A shallow channel, no deeper than your finger, dug in a ring around each plant or along the base of each row. Water is poured slowly into this channel, directly against the soil, where it soaks downward toward the roots rather than spreading uselessly across the surface. The plant drinks from below. The leaves stay dry. The sun finds nothing to scorch. Timing matters just as much as method. Every experienced Anatolian farmer waters either in the very early morning before the heat builds or in the early evening after the worst of the sun has passed, never at midday. Not because the old stories say the roots will burn, that particular myth has been debated for years, but because watering at peak heat means the majority of your water is lost to evaporation before the soil has any chance to absorb it. You are essentially pouring water into the air. The Anatolian farmer cannot afford that. Neither can your garden. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known that every expensive irrigation catalog fails to mention. Consistent deep watering once or twice a week builds stronger, more drought-resistant plants than light daily watering ever will. When water is delivered deeply and infrequently, roots chase it downward, growing longer and stronger, reaching into the cooler layers of soil that hold moisture long after the surface has dried out. A plant with deep roots in Anatolian soil is a plant that survives August. A plant watered lightly every day develops shallow roots that exist entirely in the zone the summer sun destroys first. One final tool in the Anatolian water wisdom arsenal, and it costs nothing: mulch. Dry grass, straw, crushed dry leaves, even flat stones placed around the base of plants. Village farmers across the Aegean coast and the Black Sea foothills have used ground covering for generations, not because someone told them to, but because they watched uncovered soil lose its moisture in hours while covered soil stayed damp for days. Your water is precious. Spend it the way an Anatolian farmer does. Slowly, deliberately, and always closer to the root than the sky. Walk into any farming household in rural Anatolia in the dead of winter and look carefully at the highest shelf in the kitchen or the driest corner of the storage room. You will almost always find something wrapped in old cloth, tucked into a clay pot, or tied in a small paper bundle with a name written in faded pencil. Seeds. Last season's seeds, saved by hand, dried slowly in the autumn shade, and stored with the same quiet care that another household might reserve for documents or valuables. Because to the Anatolian peasant farmer, that is exactly what they are. This tradition of seed saving is not nostalgia. It is not a romantic attachment to the old ways for the sake of sentiment. It is a deeply practical system that has ensured every new growing season begins with seeds already adapted to local soil, local weather, and local conditions. Seeds bought from a shop are strangers to your land. Seeds saved from last year's harvest are family. Before a single seed goes into Anatolian ground, the farmer consults something no app can replicate: the seasonal calendar carried entirely in his memory and confirmed by the world around him. Not the printed calendar on the wall, the living one outside the window. In central Anatolia, the last killing frost typically releases its hold somewhere between mid-March and early April, depending on altitude. The farmer does not trust a date. He trusts the signs. When the wild almond trees along the road begin to show their first white blossoms, the worst of the cold is breaking. When the storks return to their rooftop nests in the village, the soil is warm enough for the first direct sowings. When the apricot trees along the southern walls are in full bloom, it is time to move. These are not superstitions. They are thousands of years of accumulated observation compressed into readable signals that the natural world broadcasts freely to anyone paying attention. Here is the practical planting framework drawn directly from that Anatolian seasonal wisdom. Late February to mid-March is the time for starting seeds indoors or in a sheltered cold frame. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant all need 8 to 10 weeks of indoor growth before they are ready for Anatolian outdoor conditions. Start them now in whatever container you have available. Old yogurt pots, cut plastic bottles, wooden seed trays. The Anatolian farmer wastes nothing and improvises everything. Mid-March to early April is the window for cold-tolerant direct sowings outside. Onions, garlic already in the ground since autumn. Broad beans, peas, spinach, and radishes all tolerate the tail end of Anatolian cold without flinching. These go directly into prepared soil as soon as it can be worked. They do not wait for warmth. They create it. Late April through May is when the real Anatolian garden comes alive. Soil temperatures on the plateau have stabilized enough for cucumbers, courgettes, beans, and squash to go directly into the ground. Tomato and pepper seedlings started indoors are now hardened off and ready for transplanting. Hardening off in the Anatolian tradition means simply setting your seedlings outside in a sheltered spot for a few hours each day, gradually increasing their exposure over a week until they stop flinching at the wind and the direct sun. No complicated process, just patience and observation.
Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known about planting depth and spacing that seed packets never quite capture honestly. In Anatolian soil, which tends toward the dry and compact side across the plateau, seeds planted slightly deeper than standard recommendations find more consistent moisture and establish faster. A bean that the packet says plant 5 centimeters deep goes 7 centimeters deep in a dry Anatolian summer plot. A tomato seedling gets buried up to its first set of true leaves, encouraging a stronger root system along the buried stem. Spacing, the Anatolian farmer will tell you, is about air as much as it is about room. In the humid coastal regions near the Aegean and Black Sea, tight spacing invites fungal problems fast. On the drier central plateau, slightly wider spacing between plants reduces competition for the moisture that is always the limiting factor. Plant with the season, not against it. Save what grows well and plant it again.
Feed the soil before you ask it to feed you. These 3 rules have guided Anatolian hands through drought years, frost years, and war years alike. They will not fail your garden either. There is a garden pattern you will notice if you spend enough time walking through the older villages of Anatolia. It will confuse you at first, especially if your understanding of gardening comes from the neat, separated rows of modern growing guides. In these village gardens, crops grow together in what looks, to the untrained eye, like beautiful, organized chaos. Tomatoes sharing space with basil, tall climbing beans growing up through the center of squash plants, onions and carrots interplanted in the same narrow bed, marigolds, deep orange and stubborn, pushed into every available gap between vegetables like uninvited guests who somehow make every gathering better. This is not accidental. This is not the result of poor planning or limited space, though Anatolian village gardens are rarely generous in size. This is a sophisticated, tested, and time-proven system of companion planting that the peasant farmers of this land have practiced for so long that most of them could not tell you when it started. It simply always was. And it works with a consistency that would embarrass most modern monoculture approaches. The principle behind Anatolian companion planting is not complicated once you understand what the farmer is actually solving. In a garden with limited water, limited soil fertility, and a pest pressure that builds quickly in the dry heat of an Anatolian summer, growing a single crop in isolation is a risk. One disease, one insect, one bad week of weather, and an entire bed is gone. But a mixed planting, where each crop contributes something to its neighbors while drawing different nutrients from different soil depths, behaves like a small ecosystem rather than a collection of individual plants. It becomes resilient in the way that only diversity can produce. Here are the core companion combinations that Anatolian village farmers have relied on across generations and that you can apply directly to your garden from the first season. Tomatoes and basil are planted together across virtually every village garden from the Aegean coast to the Cappadocian valleys. The basil is not there purely for the kitchen, though it will serve that purpose abundantly. Its strong, volatile oils confuse and repel the aphids and whiteflies that target tomato plants with particular enthusiasm in the Anatolian summer heat. Plant basil at the base of every 3rd or 4th tomato plant, and you will notice the difference by midsummer without applying a single chemical. Beans and squash form one of the oldest companion combinations in Anatolian growing tradition. The beans fix nitrogen from the air directly into the soil through their root nodules, feeding the heavy-feeding squash plants growing alongside them. The broad squash leaves, meanwhile, create a living mulch across the soil surface, reducing moisture evaporation and suppressing the weeds that would otherwise compete with both crops. 2 plants, planted together, doing the work of fertilizer, mulch, and weed control simultaneously. Onions and carrots are another pairing found consistently in traditional Anatolian plots, and the reason is elegantly simple. The strong scent of onion foliage masks the carrot smell that attracts carrot fly. The carrot foliage in turn deters the onion fly that damages onion bulbs. They protect each other through nothing more than proximity and scent. No sprays, no barriers, no intervention required. Marigolds deserve particular mention because their role in the Anatolian village garden goes beyond companion planting into something closer to a full-time garden guardian. The specific variety that Anatolian farmers have grown for centuries, a hardy, single-flowered type with a scent strong enough to smell from several feet away, releases compounds from its roots into the surrounding soil that actively suppress nematodes, the microscopic soil pests that attack the root systems of tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. Plant marigolds throughout your garden, not just at the edges, and you are deploying a biological pest management system that has never needed updating, patching, or replacing. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known that companion planting guides sold in bookshops consistently understate. The benefit of growing crops together is not just about which specific plants help which other specific plants. It is about creating a garden that is harder for problems to move through. A pest or disease that spreads easily through 40 tomato plants growing in a clean, uninterrupted row meets a completely different challenge in a garden where tomatoes, basil, marigolds, and onions are woven together. It has to navigate, adapt, and overcome variety rather than simply march forward through uniformity. The Anatolian peasant farmer could not afford to lose a crop, so he built his garden to make sure that losing everything at once was almost impossible. That thinking costs nothing to adopt, and it changes everything about how your garden performs. There is a corner in almost every traditional Anatolian village garden that the farmer guards with a quiet, almost private pride. It is not the corner with the tallest tomatoes or the heaviest squash. It is not the most visible or the most photographed part of the garden. It is usually the least attractive spot on the entire plot. A low pile in the shadiest corner, dark and slightly steaming on cold mornings, smelling of earth and decomposition and something older than either of those things. The compost pile. To the Anatolian peasant farmer, this pile is not waste management. It is wealth creation. Everything that leaves the kitchen and the garden in the wrong direction, everything thrown away rather than returned, represents a direct loss from next season's harvest. The farmer who wastes his organic matter is the farmer who will pay for fertility with money he may not have. And in a tradition built almost entirely on resourcefulness, that is a mistake nobody makes twice. Understanding how to feed Anatolian soil without spending a single lira begins with understanding what that soil is actually hungry for. Across the Central Plateau, soils tend to be alkaline, low in organic matter, and quick to lose what little moisture they hold. The Aegean coastal soils are warmer and more forgiving, but still benefit enormously from consistent organic feeding. The heavy clay soils of the Black Sea foothills need organic matter not primarily for nutrition, but for structure, to open them up, improve drainage, and make them workable through the wet season. In every one of these cases, the answer the Anatolian farmer reaches for is the same: organic matter, returned to the soil consistently, season after season, in whatever form is available. Here is the practical system that village farmers across Anatolia have operated for generations, broken down into the 3 inputs that cost nothing, and together build some of the most productive garden soil you will ever work with. The first input is kitchen compost. Every vegetable peel, every fruit core, every eggshell, every tea glass emptied at the end of the evening goes into the pile. Coffee grounds, onion skins, the outer leaves of cabbages trimmed before cooking, melon rinds from the summer table. All of it. In a traditional Anatolian household, nothing organic reaches the rubbish bin until it has first been assessed for the garden. The pile is turned with a fork every week or two, moisture is added in dry weather, and within 3 to 4 months, what began as kitchen scraps has transformed into dark, crumbling, nutrient-dense compost that smells like a forest floor after rain. The second input is wood ash from the winter stove. In Anatolian villages where wood burning is still the primary heating source, ash accumulates in significant quantities through the cold months. This ash is collected carefully, kept dry, and applied to garden beds in early spring before planting. Wood ash is rich in potassium and calcium, two nutrients that Anatolian crops, particularly tomatoes, peppers, and fruiting vegetables, consume in large quantities through the growing season.
It also raises soil pH slightly, which can be beneficial in the more acidic plots found in the wetter northern and western regions. A thin scattering worked lightly into the top few centimeters of soil is all that is needed. More is not better here. The Anatolian farmer uses it sparingly and consistently rather than heavily and occasionally. The third input is aged animal manure. In villages where chickens, goats, or cattle are still kept, manure is considered as valuable as any crop the land produces. It is collected, piled separately from the kitchen compost, and left to age for a minimum of 3 to 4 months before being applied to garden beds. Fresh manure applied directly to soil is too nitrogen hot and will burn plant roots and disrupt the soil biology that makes everything else function. Aged manure, dark and dry and almost odorless, feeds the soil slowly and deeply in a way that synthetic fertilizers, for all their concentrated numbers, fundamentally cannot replicate. It feeds the organisms in the soil first. Those organisms then feed your plants. This is the correct order, and the Anatolian farmer has always known it. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known that the fertilizer industry has spent decades trying to make you forget. Soil is not a passive growing medium waiting to be filled with inputs. It is a living community of bacteria, fungi, worms, and microscopic organisms so dense and so interdependent that a single handful of healthy Anatolian garden soil contains more living organisms than there are people on this entire earth. Every time you feed that community with organic matter, you are not just adding nutrition. You are investing in a biological system that will multiply your returns season after season without ever sending you an invoice. The Anatolian farmer never needed to be told this. He learned it by watching what happened to the corner of the field closest to the old compost pile. It was always greener, always more productive, always the last to struggle in a dry year. He did not need a study to confirm what his eyes showed him every single growing season. Neither do you. There is a particular kind of frustration that every gardener knows. You walk out one morning to a plant that was thriving the evening before and find it devastated. Leaves riddled with holes, stems wilting from the base. A cucumber vine that was days away from producing its first fruit now collapsing under a pest pressure that seemed to arrive from nowhere overnight. In that moment, the instinct of the modern gardener is to reach for a product. A spray, a powder, a solution in a bottle with a warning label, and a price that stings almost as much as losing the crop did. The Anatolian peasant farmer reaches for something else entirely: observation, memory, and a set of interventions so simple and so effective that they have kept Anatolian gardens productive through centuries of summers without a single chemical ever touching the soil. Pest management in the traditional Anatolian garden begins not at the moment of infestation, but weeks before it arrives. Because the farmer who has walked his land, built his soil, planted with companions, and watered correctly has already removed most of the conditions that allow pest populations to explode in the first place. Healthy soil produces healthy plants. Healthy plants with strong cell walls and robust root systems are genuinely harder for insects and disease to penetrate than weak, nutrient-deficient plants grown in exhausted ground. This is not folklore. This is plant biology. And the Anatolian farmer understood it practically long before science gave it a name. But pests come regardless. Even the most carefully managed Anatolian garden will face aphid pressure in spring, spider mites in the dry heat of July, and caterpillar damage through the middle of summer. The question is never whether they will arrive,
The question is whether your garden is strong enough and your response fast enough to prevent them from taking hold. Here is the pest management toolkit that Anatolian village farmers have assembled and refined across generations, using nothing that cannot be made, found, or grown on the land itself. The first tool is early detection through daily walking. The Anatolian farmer does not inspect his garden once a week. He passes through it every morning, eyes moving across leaves, stems, and soil surfaces with the casual but comprehensive attention of someone who knows exactly what normal looks like and will notice the moment something changes. Aphid colonies caught at 10 insects are a minor inconvenience. Aphid colonies discovered at 10,000 are a serious problem. The difference between those two situations is almost always the frequency of observation. When aphids are found in small numbers on tomatoes, peppers, or beans, the Anatolian response is immediate and physical. A strong spray of plain water directed at the underside of affected leaves dislodges the colonies before they establish. This is done in the early morning, so the foliage dries quickly in the rising heat. Repeated over 3 consecutive mornings, it breaks the colony cycle without harming a single beneficial insect in the process. For more persistent, soft-bodied pest pressure, village farmers across Anatolia have long used a preparation so simple it almost sounds too basic to work. A handful of wood ash dissolved in water and left to steep overnight, then strained and sprayed directly onto affected plants. The alkaline solution disrupts the soft bodies of aphids, mites, and small caterpillars on contact, while leaving the soil and beneficial insects entirely unharmed. The same ash that fed your soil in spring becomes your pest spray in summer. Nothing wasted, nothing purchased. Garlic water is another traditional Anatolian pest deterrent that deserves far more recognition than it receives outside village growing circles. Several crushed garlic cloves steeped in water for 24 hours, then diluted and sprayed across vulnerable plants, creates a scent barrier that confuses and deters the flying insects that locate their host plants primarily through smell. In the dense, dry heat of a central Anatolian summer afternoon, the volatile compounds in garlic water remain active on leaf surfaces for several days before needing reapplication. For soil-level pests, particularly the cutworms that sever young seedling stems at ground level overnight, the Anatolian farmer uses a physical collar placed around each transplant at planting time. A ring of stiff material, historically a strip of bark or a cylinder of dry reed, pushed an inch into the soil around each seedling stem, creates a physical barrier the cutworm cannot easily navigate around. Simple, free, and almost completely effective when applied consistently. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known about pest management that the agrochemical industry was never particularly motivated to advertise. A garden that loses a small amount to pests every season is a garden in balance. The goal is never the complete elimination of every insect that feeds on your crops. The goal is maintaining a population of natural predators, ladybirds, lacewings, parasitic wasps, and ground beetles, healthy enough to keep pest populations below the threshold where real damage occurs. Every time you spray a broad-spectrum chemical, you kill both sides of that equation and start the imbalance from scratch. The Anatolian farmer never sprayed everything to save something. He managed carefully, intervened precisely, and trusted the balance his soil and his companions had already created. That balance is available to every garden. You just have to be willing to walk through it every morning with your eyes fully open. There is a moment in every growing season that the Anatolian farmer waits for with a patience that the modern world has largely forgotten how to practice. It is not the moment of planting, though that carries its own quiet anticipation. It is not the first sign of germination, though watching a seed push through Anatolian soil never loses its power, no matter how many seasons you have seen it happen. It is the moment just before harvest, that specific window of time when a crop has reached the absolute peak of everything it was growing toward, when the color is right, the weight is right, the smell is right, and the farmer's hand moves toward it with the certainty of someone who has been reading this particular language for a lifetime. Harvesting at the right moment is not a minor detail in Anatolian farming tradition. It is considered one of the highest skills a grower can develop. Because in a system with no refrigeration, no preservation technology beyond what the household itself can provide, and no margin for waste, picking too early means losing flavor, nutrition, and storage potential. Picking too late means losing the crop to overripeness, splitting, pest damage, or the simple indignity of watching something you grew with months of care rot on the vine before it reaches the table. The Anatolian farmer picks neither too early nor too late. He picks at the exact right moment. And here is how that judgment is built and how you can develop it in your own garden from your very first season. For tomatoes, the Anatolian standard is color combined with give. A tomato that has reached full color for its variety, but still feels slightly firm under gentle thumb pressure, is at the precise point of peak flavor and will continue to ripen beautifully indoors over the following 2 to 3 days. Village farmers across the Aegean and Mediterranean regions of Anatolia never wait for full softness on the vine. A fully soft tomato still attached to the plant is a tomato already beginning its decline. Pick it at the moment color is complete and firmness is just beginning to yield. For cucumbers, the Anatolian timing rule is simple and unforgiving. Pick them young. A cucumber left on the vine even 2 days past its ideal harvest size begins converting its sugars to seeds, thickening its skin, and developing the bitterness that makes it unpleasant to eat raw. The village farmer checks his cucumbers every single morning during peak season without exception. A cucumber that was the right size yesterday may be past its best by tomorrow morning. Daily harvesting also signals the plant to keep producing. A cucumber vine that holds overripe fruit stops flowering. A cucumber vine harvested consistently at peak produces continuously until the first frost ends the season. For peppers, Anatolia offers a harvesting tradition with 2 completely distinct stages that most outside the region do not fully appreciate. Green peppers harvested early in the season provide fresh eating and cooking throughout summer. The same peppers left on the plant will slowly turn red, orange, or yellow depending on variety, concentrating their sugars, deepening their flavor, and transforming into an entirely different ingredient. The farmer harvests some green throughout the season for immediate use and leaves a deliberate portion to reach full color for drying, preserving, and the making of the pepper pastes that sit in clay pots on every Anatolian kitchen shelf through winter. For beans and legumes, the Anatolian approach divides cleanly between fresh harvest and seed saving. Beans intended for fresh eating are picked while the pods are still bright, tender, and before the seeds inside have fully swelled against the pod wall. Beans intended for drying and winter storage are left on the plant until the pods have turned papery, dry, and begun to rattle slightly when moved. These dried beans are pulled from the plant on a dry, sunny morning, spread on flat surfaces in full sun for several additional days, then shelled and stored in cloth bags in a cool, dry place. Squash and pumpkins follow one of the clearest harvest signals in the entire Anatolian garden. When the stem connecting the fruit to the vine begins to dry, cork over, and turn woody, the fruit is ready. Not when the skin looks right, not when the size seems sufficient, when the stem dries. This is the signal the plant itself sends to say that it has finished investing in that fruit and has released it. Harvest at that moment, and your winter squash will store for 4 to 6 months without any treatment beyond being kept in a cool, dry room. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known about harvesting that changes everything once you understand it. The harvest is not the end of the garden's work. It is the beginning of the next season's preparation. Every crop you harvest creates space, light, and soil capacity for something else to follow it. Every seed you save from your best-performing plants is a direct investment in a garden that becomes more adapted to your specific land with every passing year. The Anatolian farmer never saw harvest as a conclusion. He saw it as a continuation. The garden does not stop. The farmer does not stop. The soil does not stop. The season simply turns, and the work begins again. There is a gesture you will see in traditional Anatolian villages at the end of every harvest season that carries more meaning than it might first appear to hold. An older woman, hands darkened by decades of soil and sun, moving slowly through her garden in the cooling days of late September. She is not harvesting for the kitchen anymore, she is selecting. Moving past perfectly good fruits, perfectly edible vegetables, bypassing the biggest and most tempting specimens with a deliberate patience that confuses anyone watching for the first time. She is looking for something specific. She is looking for the best. Not the largest, not the most attractive. The best. The tomato that produced earliest and most consistently through the hottest weeks of August. The pepper plant that stood strong through the dry spell in July when everything around it struggled. The bean that germinated fastest in cold spring soil and produced pods right through to October without slowing. These are the plants she marks. These are the ones she will save seed from. And in doing so, she is performing an act that connects her directly to every woman and every farmer who worked this same Anatolian soil before her, doing the same thing, in the same season, for the same reason. Keeping the garden alive through the winter, and making it stronger on the other side. Seed saving is the single most powerful act of independence available to any gardener working Anatolian land. It breaks the annual cycle of purchasing, of depending on outside supply chains, of starting every season as a beginner because your seeds carry no memory of your specific soil, your specific climate, or your specific growing conditions. Saved seeds are not just seeds, they are accumulated adaptation. Every generation of seeds saved from your own garden is a generation more suited to exactly where you are and exactly what you are working with. Here's the practical seed-saving system that Anatolian village farmers have refined across centuries, broken down crop by crop for immediate application in your garden. Tomato seeds are among the easiest to save and among the most rewarding, because the improvement in flavor and performance of locally adapted tomato varieties over commercially produced seeds is dramatic and noticeable within just 2 or 3 saved generations. Select your best performing plant, one that showed strong disease resistance, consistent production, and excellent flavor. Allow 1 or 2 fruits on that plant to remain on the vine well past normal eating ripeness, until they are deeply colored, slightly soft, and beginning to wrinkle at the shoulders. Cut these fruits open and scoop the seeds along with their surrounding gel into a small jar of water. Leave this jar at room temperature for 2 to 3 days, stirring once daily. This fermentation process breaks down the germination-inhibiting gel coating around each seed, mirroring what happens naturally when a tomato falls and rots on the ground. After 3 days, viable seeds will have sunk to the bottom, while hollow or non-viable seeds float to the surface along with the fermented gel. Pour off the floating material, rinse the sunk seeds thoroughly under clean water, then spread them on a flat, non-stick surface. A ceramic plate or a piece of glass works perfectly, and leave them to dry completely in a shaded, well-ventilated spot for 7 to 10 days. Pepper seeds require none of the fermentation process that tomatoes need. Simply select your best plant, leave 1 or 2 fruits to reach full ripe color and begin to wrinkle, then cut them open, scrape the seeds onto a dry surface, and allow them to air dry for 10 to 14 days in a shaded spot away from direct sunlight. Direct sun dries the outer coat too fast and can reduce germination rates significantly. Shade-dried pepper seeds saved this way remain viable for 3 to 4 years when stored correctly. Bean and legume seeds are the most forgiving of all crops to save, and the most immediately rewarding for a beginner seed saver. Simply leave your strongest, most productive plants to dry completely on the vine at the end of the season. When the pods are papery, dry, and rattling with loose seeds inside, pull the entire plant and hang it upside down in a dry, ventilated shed for 2 additional weeks. Then shell the pods by hand, spread the seeds for a final week of drying, and store them in paper envelopes or cloth bags clearly labeled with the variety name and the harvest year. Storage is where many first-time seed savers lose what they worked hard to collect. The enemies of stored seeds are moisture, heat, and light. The traditional Anatolian method of storing in paper or cloth in a cool, dark, dry location, a high kitchen shelf away from the stove, a stone storage room, a cool corner of a shaded outbuilding,
is as effective as any modern seed storage system ever designed. Seeds stored this way remain viable for 2 to 5 years depending on the crop. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known about seed saving that no commercial seed catalog will ever have reason to tell you. The moment you save your own seeds successfully for the first time, something shifts in how you understand your garden. It stops being a project you restart from scratch each spring and becomes something continuous, living, and self-sustaining across years and decades. The Anatolian farmer did not buy seeds every season because he understood something profound. The best seed for your land is already growing in your land. You just have to be willing to save it.
Most gardeners make the same mistake at the end of every growing season. The last tomato is picked, the final cucumber harvested, the bean vines pulled from their supports, and then the garden is abandoned. Left bare and empty through the cold months, exposed to wind, frost, and rain, the soil slowly losing the structure and biology that the entire previous season worked to build. They walk away believing the garden is resting. The Anatolian farmer never walks away, because in the tradition of Anatolian peasant farming, the end of the harvest season is not the conclusion of the gardening year. It is the opening of its most important chapter. The work done to the soil and the garden structure between October and February determines the ceiling of everything that will grow the following spring. Neglect this period, and you begin next season from the same place you began this one. Honor it the way the old farmers do, and you begin next season from somewhere significantly further forward. This is the knowledge that separates the gardener who improves every year from the one who repeats the same results indefinitely. The first act of Anatolian winter preparation begins immediately after the final harvest, while the soil is still warm enough to work comfortably. Every spent plant is removed from the beds completely, roots and all where possible. This is not optional tidiness. Spent plant material left in the soil through winter harbors the overwintering eggs and pupae of the same pest insects that caused problems during the growing season. Removing it breaks the cycle before it completes. Diseased plant material goes nowhere near the compost pile. It is burned or removed from the garden entirely. Healthy spent plant material, bean vines, squash stems, corn stalks, goes directly onto the compost pile, where it will spend the winter breaking down into next season's soil amendment. Once the beds are cleared, the Anatolian farmer applies what village growers across the Central Plateau call the winter feed. A generous layer of aged compost, 2 to 3 inches deep, spread across every cleared bed and left on the surface without digging it in. The winter rains and frosts will work it slowly into the soil over the following months, far more effectively than any spade could manage in a single afternoon. By spring, what was spread on the surface in October has been incorporated, processed by soil organisms, and transformed into available nutrition, waiting for the first roots of the new season to find it. This surface application also protects the soil biology through the coldest months. Bare soil exposed to hard Anatolian frost loses its surface structure rapidly, the freeze-thaw cycle breaking down the aggregates that make soil workable and well-draining. A covered soil surface maintains a more stable temperature, protects the fungal networks running through the top layers, and arrives in spring in dramatically better condition than soil left naked through winter. Garlic goes into the ground in October across virtually every Anatolian village garden without exception. This is not merely tradition for the sake of tradition. Garlic planted in autumn establishes its root system through the cool months, developing the strong underground foundation that produces significantly larger bulbs than spring-planted garlic ever achieves. The Anatolian farmer plants his best-saved cloves from the previous harvest, pointed end upward, 2 inches deep, 6 inches apart, in beds already dressed with the winter compost layer. By the time spring arrives, green garlic shoots are already pushing through the soil, the first visible sign of life in the garden, and one of the most quietly satisfying sights in all of Anatolian growing. Broad beans follow garlic into the ground in November across the warmer lowland regions of Anatolia,
particularly along the Aegean coast and in the sheltered valleys of the southern regions. These extraordinarily cold hardy plants germinate in cool soil, grow slowly through winter, and arrive in spring as established plants weeks ahead of anything that could be started from seed in the new year. By the time late spring crops are being transplanted, the broad beans are already flowering, fixing nitrogen into the soil and approaching their own harvest. For the beds that will lie empty through winter, the Anatolian farmer reaches for one more tool that costs nothing and returns enormous value by spring: cover crops. Rye, vetch, and clover have been sown into emptied Anatolian garden beds through the cold season for generations. These plants grow slowly through winter, their roots holding the soil structure against the erosive force of winter rain, their leaf cover protecting the surface, and their green bulk turned into the soil in early spring just before planting, adding a fresh surge of organic matter and nitrogen at exactly the moment the garden needs it most. The Anatolian farmer checks his garden through winter not because there is urgent work to do, but because observation never stops. A midwinter walk through a resting garden shows you where water pools after heavy rain, where frost hits hardest and longest, where the soil surface is holding well, and where it needs attention before spring arrives. Every winter walk is a lesson that makes the following growing season more informed. Here is what the old farmers of Anatolia have always known that modern gardening culture consistently fails to honor. The garden does not rest in winter. It recovers, rebuilds, and prepares. The farmer who understands this and works with it, rather than abandoning the land until spring, will always grow more, waste less, and struggle less than the one who treats the cold months as a gap between gardening seasons, rather than an essential part of a single continuous cycle. The soil never stops its work. The farmer who matches that commitment will never stop improving. And that is the Anatolian way. Not a season, not a hobby. A life lived in honest, unbroken relationship with the ground beneath your feet. 10,000 years of Anatolian farming wisdom did not survive this long by being kept secret. It survived because farmers shared it, neighbor to neighbor, generation to generation, field to field. Now, it is your turn. Drop a comment below and tell us one thing. What does your land look like right now? That is how this community grows. One answer, one farmer, one plot of soil at a time. If this spoke to you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who has dirt under their fingernails. We will see you in the next one. This is the Anatolian peasant farmers. The soil remembers, and so do we.